Welcome back, everybody. It's been a little while since I've recorded one of these here talking videos. I apologize for the delay. I've been slacking off here mostly because there has been so much going on in the gaming world as well as in my personal life, and so I've just kind of put this all on the back burner. You may recall I had promised a couple of months ago to do reviews on both Diablo 4 once that came out, as well as a review of Final Fantasy 16. Then when Season 1 of Diablo 4 came out, I said I would do a review of the game up until that point. Well, Season 1 is about halfway done at this point, and, well, it's been a roller coaster for D4. I'm not going to go into too much depth on it, but I wanted to take the time to express my thoughts on the game as a whole, how I feel about it, and where things are heading. So, let's take a quick trip through what has happened over the last couple of months with Diablo 4 and get caught up. I was not someone who kept up very much with the news and development of Diablo 4. I saw the story trailer with Lilith, and I was hooked. The series has always done a great job at having gripping cinematics and addictive gameplay loops, and my wife and I are always looking for local co-op games to play together, and there aren't too many we enjoy. Borderlands, Nobody Saves the World, and even some beat-em-ups like Shredder's Revenge on occasion. That said, the game we got the most enjoyment out of playing together was Diablo 3. I know, there's a lot of hate for D3 in the community, and I can't say I'm one of those. I didn't play it when it first came out, and I heard all the complaints about the auction house. Over the years, it changed, and I first played the console demo when it first launched on PS3, and then it came out on PS4, which allowed console players to play seasons, something I had never done before. I had played a lot of D3 and a ton of Diablo 2 back when I was in high school and college, back when it was in its prime in the early 2000s. However, my usual relationship with Diablo is to play a ton of it for a couple months, and then set it down for a year or so. Come back and binge on it for a few months, set it down, and repeat. So when it finally came time for Diablo 4 to come out, I bought it day one, and my wife and I started playing through the main campaign. One of the things that stood out was the ability to customize your character, something that wasn't possible in early games except for selecting one of the two genders in Diablo 3. However, there is certainly a lot more variety here. You can either go with some pre-randomized characters, or you can build your own. You can create Walmart brand Emmett Selk, like I did, and then learn that all the glamours for male sorcerer are the same as female sorceress, so you look like a drag queen most of the time. If you want to go with the female Necro, you can make your own version of Eugenia Cooney, or you can pick up a female druid and build your own Lizzo.
That's a huge bitch!
The point is that there are options to customize your character, which I thought was pretty cool. The story, as expected, is the main focus of the game for the leveling process. Assuming you don't just rush through it, most people will be carried from levels 1 to 50 just by doing the MSQ, which leads me to another point. Diablo 4 tries to straddle the line between a traditional Diablo game and an MMO. Unfortunately, it turns out really doing neither one very well. Instead of having zones that are specific to each act, you now have one large contiguous world map that is an absolute slog to get through until you unlock the various waypoints and then unlock your mount, which, if memory serves, is around level 40 near the end of the MSQ. Fortunately, once you unlock these things, they are unlocked for all subsequent characters, both in the Eternal Realm and Seasonal Realm, so you only have to do it once. This is a quality of life change that didn't exist until Season 1. Also coming up is a change to the Renown system, where you increase your Renown with various regions and unlock different rewards at different tiers. If I understand correctly, this is also going to be a permanent unlock across all characters and game modes except Hardcore. Some of these are changes that never should have been necessary to begin with, since I think the game always should have operated this way, but better late than never. As for the lack of a definitive act structure, I really wish they hadn't gotten rid of that, but it is what it is. I can appreciate them trying something new, but I prefer the old way of doing things. Also back is the skill point system. D3 changed it up where you could easily respec different builds by simply reassigning different skills you had unlocked when leveling from 1 through 70. In D4, you have to spend in-game currency to respec everything or individual points. I get wanting to make redoing a build a little more costly and wanting people to invest more in particular builds and sticking with them, but that's a quality of life change I think a lot of people wish was easier to do. If nothing else, at least give us the ability to save different builds and gear sets, and then all you have to do is pay the gold fee to switch over without having to redo everything each time. Having an option to switch loadouts with a couple of clicks would be a godsend, but I don't think that's coming anytime soon. Now, as for the story itself, I really enjoyed the main campaign, and even many side quests have some pretty good storylines that flesh out the world a bit more. The problem, at least until Renown gets fixed, is having to run them over and over on every character you make to earn the bonuses. Anyway, I digress. And perhaps the most glaring problem with the main story is that for a game called Diablo 4, Diablo is nowhere in it. I assume there will be something involving the Lord of Terror in a DLC, but I don't understand why he wasn't in it at all. There were some fun callbacks and rematches against bosses from D2 like Duriel and Andariel, but that's about it, which is another problem. Unlike Diablo 2 and Diablo 3, there is no way to revisit boss fights once you've done them. I don't mean not being able to replay the main story. Of course, even then, the only way to do that is to create a new character and go through it again. This was an option in Diablo 3 once you completed the main story with one tune, but you could at least revisit certain dungeons and fight them over and over again. That's not an option here. In Diablo 2, you played through the main campaign 3 times on 3 separate difficulties, and again, you could revisit dungeons and farm bosses for loot. None of that exists in D4. Though there are numerous dungeons to play through to get different legendary aspects, there are only a handful of boss options. You'll find yourself fighting Blood Bishop and Tomb Lord over and over again until you're sick of seeing them. These dungeons also don't feel quite as procedurally generated as they used to be, nor are the objectives all that varied. Usually there are 2 phases to a dungeon, and there are only a handful of objectives that are used. So, yes, there are a lot of dungeons, but the variety feels a bit lacking compared to earlier entries. Again, the main focus is the story, which is mostly good as far as I was concerned, up until the end when things sort of go off the rails. I still don't entirely understand why certain story choices were made, and I feel like there were conflicting messages over whether or not we should have sided against Lilith. Though, judging from the community in general, most people wanted to side with Lilith because they were down bad for their demon Dami Mommy fetish. Which, let's be honest, who among us hasn't been there before? At some point, every guy in the late 90s and early 2000s wanted their big titty goth girlfriend, and now we're all in our 30s and 40s with that same nostalgic longing for that chick who worked at Hot Topic.
Right? Why we kill Lilith? I mean... oh no. Yeah, this is what we've been looking for. This is what it's all about.
Anyway, the story itself ends on a cliffhanger, which sort of annoyed me at first, considering how abruptly the story ends. The more I thought about it, though, I realized that every Diablo game has had the main story end on some sort of cliffhanger. D2 ended with Baal reclaiming his Soul Stone, for example, which led right into the Lord of Destruction expansion. I don't recall exactly how D3 ended the main campaign, but I seem to remember the Reaper of Souls expansion building off of it fairly well. It's been a long time since I played D3's campaign, so my memory is a bit fuzzy on that, and I'm too lazy to look it up. Heck, D1 ended with the hero shoving Diablo's Soulstone into his forehead, so D4 ending on a cliffhanger that will likely flow right into the DLC that comes out eventually isn't all that big of a deal in principle. However, I was a bit disappointed in the decisions made in the story at the end because I felt that the main characters began channeling Patrick Star with their level of IQ. We'll see how it goes, though. I'm interested to see how they conclude the story, whenever that happens. Now, the biggest and most glaring problem with Diablo 4 is the endgame. Now, I've been beating my head against a wall trying to figure out exactly what it is that I don't like about the post-MSQ game loop in D4 that didn't bother me in the other games. Is it just the fact that I can't fight old bosses again? Maybe. Is it that being able to respec is cumbersome? Maybe, but that didn't bother me all that much in D2, so I can't really say that's why. The game launched with Nightmare Dungeons, a super boss at the end with Uberlilith, and even Helltides. D3 had bounties you could do, but mostly you just ended up running greater rifts and seeing how far you could push while also farming Paragon points. Is that really all that dissimilar from farming Nightmare Dungeons and seeing how high you can push? Not really. Doesn't seem like it on paper anyway. To put it bluntly, a lot of what you can do after finishing the main campaign is similar in some form to other entries. Is it that the endgame is bad, or have I just been convinced that it's bad by all of the negative posts on Reddit and YouTube? I honestly couldn't tell you. What I can tell you is this, though. I went in and logged in and started finishing up some of the season storyline, clearing malignant tunnels, and watching groups of mobs melt before me and my wife's necromancer and druid, respectively. You know what? It was fun. I had fun doing it for a while. Does it mean I had fun dealing with the ridiculous amounts of useless gems, hearts, and gear I had to salvage or sell? Not really. All of that's more of a minor inconvenience than anything else, but the gameplay loop of mowing stuff down and feeling powerful is still fun in my opinion. Of course, even thinking the game is fun at all goes against the narrative. The meme, of course, is D4 is dead and on life support. It's a dead game after only 2 months. Well, let's just address that for a second. Part of what these claims are based on is anecdotal, meaning people will say, my group used to have X number of players, and now we only have Y playing, therefore the game is dead. Of course, if your group is a statistical outlier, then that's not really a good data set. Others, of course, will say that the Google trending searches for D4 are way down. Again, I don't really see this as a good metric since most games trend downward after a couple months of release. I'm sure you could probably do that with most games and notice a drop-off over time. And then people will claim that nobody is streaming the game on Twitch anymore, and nobody is watching anyone play it on Twitch. Again, people like me couldn't care less about it, because I've never watched anyone stream games on Twitch. I would say the vast majority of gamers don't spend their time watching people play games on Twitch when they could just play it themselves. There's also the fact that there are a bunch of other games out like Starfield, Baldur's Gate 3, and other high-profile games that have launched around the same time of year that are competing for players' attention. That's not a bad thing, but it does certainly give D4 a run for its money when it comes to people spending time with it. Of course, you could argue that if the game was as amazeballs as it was purported to be, it would be an easy choice, and everyone would be playing D4 instead. It seems like an impossible bar to clear for me, and honestly, most of these arguments seem to be made with a predetermined result in mind. If D4 was really good, there wouldn't be such a drop-off in Google searches. If D4 wasn't garbage, people would be streaming it on Twitch with countless thousands of viewers. If the game was really good, people wouldn't care about other major RPGs that have come out. These people also flat out ignore and dismiss the people who say, the game isn't perfect, but I'm still having fun. I saw someone the other day comment about having finished their 4th level 100 character, but have only fought Uberlilith once and look forward to beating her with each character. There are plenty of people out there like that, but they're all labeled as shills and overdosing on copium. Nobody can actually be having fun, and if you say you are, you're nothing but a paid whore for Activision Blizzard who can't admit they paid $70 for a beta test.
This is fine. I'm okay with the events that are unfolding currently. That's okay. Things are gonna be okay.
Which reminds me, the amount of people claiming that D4 is a paid beta is astonishing. Not only is it astonishing that as many people are claiming it as they are, it's astonishing that people actually believe it. The game feels unfinished. There's not enough endgame content. This is also we can test the game for them. Again, there has been far more released in this game than any of the other ones. Now, admittedly, standards have changed, so I hear, over the years, and what was acceptable in ARPGs a decade ago is unacceptable now. I've seen people say it online, so it must be true. They had 10 years to make the game, which is true, but it looks like they had a bunch of newbies in the development process who had never made a game before. I think that's probably a better explanation than anything else.
I think it's just like we're all kind of just working our way through it. It's like sure, we have a lot of benefits of being part of Blizzard, and we had a lot of learnings, and we were able to talk to each other and understand what's going on in WoW and what's going on in Overwatch, and we can talk to each other. But at the end of the day, this team is like doing a live service like this is new for this team, and even we have some D3 veterans and things, but a lot of our team, like there's a good part of our team where Diablo 4, we were at the launch party where I was like, how many people, this is your first game ever? And like a bunch of hands go up and you're like, this is the very first game they've ever shipped is Diablo 4. And so there's definitely like the combination of experience and the ability to access Blizzard, but like we're still going to learn as we go. And so, yeah, I mean, I think I get the, hey, you're Blizzard, you should never make a mistake. But at the same time, like, again, the industry is always changing, the games are always changing, the players are always changing. So it's just going to be learning as we go. And that's why what I love about a live service is we can evolve over time. It's not a fixed state. And so that with each season, and we're going to support the game for years to come, is that we can evolve and learn as we go.
I get that a game programmer has to start somewhere, but I can't help but think that played a part. And it's also curious that some of the things that worked well in D3 aren't present in D4. Different teams, I suppose, but you would think they would have communicated better. Regardless, there is no way you can say the game is a glorified beta test. Are there bugs and things that need to be fixed? Sure. Is the end game up to everyone's exacting standards? Clearly not. That doesn't mean it's incomplete or unfinished. Now, part of the reason as many people are saying this as they are is partially Blizzard's fault. They just announced the idea of annual expansions on top of quarterly seasons. This, of course, just feeds into the narrative that we're guinea pigs and they're just using our data for future things to fix or add, which, isn't that what every live service game does? Isn't that what every Diablo game has ever done when updating, buffing, nerfing, and adding to the game? How is that new? Of course, then people point to the 1.0 patch and the dumpster fire that was. If you haven't been keeping up with it, 1.0 introduced a ton of nerfs to the game, which, understandably, pissed a lot of people off. There was an emergency PR stream where the devs said that the patch was technically half a patch, and that all the buffs are coming shortly. They also said that they made a huge mistake in not releasing everything at once. So, everyone focused on the nerfs to classes and XP, and then all sorts of other fun conspiracy theories started coming out. Oh, they nerfed XP to force people to play longer for their metrics because people were beating the game too fast. Oh, they nerfed everything for the Eternal Realm because they want to force everyone to play the season because the Malignant Hearts will compensate. Oh, they're trying to force people to play seasons to sell battle passes. This last one is especially stupid. I found a Reddit thread where a guy was so adamant that in order to play seasons, you had to buy the battle pass, and that every bit of additional content was going to be locked behind a paywall. Of course, none of that was true, but then there are those who say, well, sure, right now the battle pass is optional, but just wait. Look what they did with Diablo Immortal and monetizing that. Does anyone remember the garbage fire that was the auction house and why they removed it? Do these people really think there is a connection between a free-to-play mobile game like Diablo Immortal that monetized and paid for itself with microtransaction because it wouldn't make money otherwise? You can hate the monetization methods in it all you want, but it was a game you could play for free otherwise. Also, do any of these morons not know what it was like when Final Fantasy XIV launched back in 1.0? There were so many quality of life features in the game and optimization issues that torpedoed that game into the ground. It was so bad, they shut the game down and rebuilt it and relaunched it. Diablo 4 is nowhere near as in so bad a state as something like that. And when A Realm Reborn relaunched as 2.0, the game was drastically different, but there wasn't just a ton of stuff to do in Endgame. Sure, you had the Crystal Tower raids and the extreme versions of your primal fights, not to mention the Coils of Bahamut series, but once you cleared them, the only thing you had to do was grind them for gear or level up another job. There was the Relic as well, which was such a grueling slog that only the most dedicated players did more than one Relic until they nerfed the requirements. I say all that to say this, 2.0 was a launching point, and people knew that there would be more expansions, more features, more story, etc. coming down the line with future expansions. Nobody was saying, oh, okay, so we're just paying for an unfinished game, and then after we've beta tested it for them, they're going to use that information for future expansions and features. Why weren't they already in the game? This is bullcrap. No, because these people weren't morons, and they understood how MMOs worked. Now, Diablo 4 isn't a true MMO, but I get the impression they're shooting for that sort of model. I have no idea if the next expansion is going to cost the same as the base game. If they're going for yearly expansions, I don't see how they could be. Will it be worth it? No idea. Only time will tell on that one. I think the game is trending in the right direction, but given their development cycles and how it sounds like they're organizing things, it may be another season or two before things are totally fleshed out where they want them. Am I happy about that? Not at all. I am, however, grateful that the devs seem to want to listen and make changes accordingly. This idea that they want the game to suck to sell battle passes is insane. The battle pass literally gives you nothing but cosmetics. The rest of the rewards for following the seasonal journey and hitting the battle pass milestones can't be skipped since they're tied to level. The ashes, which you can argue may or may not even be worth it, can't be skipped through by buying an accelerated pass. Everyone earns them the same way. Leveling. There is no pay-to-win element in the slightest. It's essentially paying $10 for a bunch of glams and emotes. You know what else gives you optional glamours and emotes you can buy with real currency? Final Fantasy XIV. Now, there are things on the MOG station that people hate and wish you could earn in-game, but everyone realizes it's optional, and most people don't care. Blizzard knows full well that if they were to torpedo the game intentionally and then tell people that they can make it suck less by buying battle passes to play seasons which will make them feel powerful again, but only for a few months and then expect people to do it over and over again, well, I realize there's good reason to doubt Blizzard's design philosophy and greedy practices, but even they aren't dumb enough to try to convert the game into a pay-to-win system after the backlash they've been getting. If they do, then the game will really be dead, and I'll say, you know what? You got me. They really are that dumb. However, I think the main reason most people are saying stuff like this is because they just have a hate boner for Blizzard and want to see them fail. The goodwill they've built up with their player base over the years is practically non-existent, and they have only themselves to blame for it. However, I'm still fine with giving the devs the benefit of the doubt, because I genuinely get the impression they want the game to be better and are working toward that goal. Now, what's the takeaway from all this? Do I recommend D4 to people who have played the series, or even those who just want to try it out? Sure. As I said before, the main story campaign is awesome to play through. The aesthetics, the soundtrack, the voice acting, and the combat loop feel great. Endgame still needs some tweaking, but as I said earlier, I'm not even really sure what I expect since most of the other games did a lot of the same stuff. Maybe I'm just getting old. Perhaps I spent too much time reading negative reviews on the game that I started to feel negatively about it, because when I took a break and then went back, I had fun again. That's really the main thing here. I can't tell you what's fun and what's not. That's your decision, and your decision alone. My wife and I have had a lot of fun playing it, and I expect we'll still get plenty of enjoyment out of it. I have no problem saying that I got my money's worth out of it. Still, that's not something I can tell you will be true for you. Also, given the fact that it is more fun for people to trash a game like this than to praise it, and because negative content gets more views and clicks, there's a glut of that on the internet. Take their comments with a grain of salt. There are those who no-lifed the game in a week and then complained that they didn't have anything to do. Then, there are those who think that Blizzard can do no wrong. Play it yourself with your eyes open. If you have a grievance with the game, that's fine. However, don't make it your life's purpose to tell everyone else that it sucks and they should hate it too. There are a lot of good, constructive critiques of the game out there, but don't let their views influence how you feel about the game. If you listen to them and you're still having fun, don't feel like you're crazy or a shill for liking a game that can still be very fun. Don't ignore the other side either, though, and dismiss any criticism as invalid or fueled by hate. There needs to be a balance here.
The direction of the patch, the direction of the game, to me, is trending correctly. I'm sure a lot of people are going to feel that it's not going in the correct direction fast enough, but the way that I think about it, not being a Blizzard shill here or anything like that, but the way that I think about it is it's only 2 months into the game. And then what people say is, Rax, they had 10 years to make the game. It's bullshit. I don't know, man. I haven't seen a game released that's just perfect, that have everything figured out. Rax, this isn't even close to perfect. It's dog shit. It's the worst game I ever heard. I don't feel that way. I don't think it's the worst game I've ever played. I don't have this super polarizing, very angry approach to it. I think Blizzard is listening. I think they are responding. I think it is trending in the right direction. So let's see. Let's see what else they have in store. I'm hoping season 2 is a big success. Copium Rax is always thinking about the next season. This guy's a piece of shit. I'm never watching his content ever. I've heard it 1,000 times.
Anyway, that's going to be it for me. Sorry for the delay on this one, but there has been so much going on that I've been trying to stay on top of it as best I can and give you as honest of a critique as possible while being fair. I'll be working on my FF16 review too soon, and I'll also be playing through Sea of Stars and talking about that too. Anyway, let me know your thoughts in the comment below. In the meantime, you take care, and I'll talk to you again soon.